Ever wish you could sit at the piano and just play? That might seem like magic, but we can break it down into 5 steps. First, here are a few examples that I improvised this morning. Each of those is an example of a short, improvised chord progression. And the 5 steps I'm going to explain to you apply to all 3. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to use these 5 steps to improvise a chord progression of your own. And you'll also understand the skills you need to develop to do this better and better over time. Step 1 is to pick a key. In practice, this usually means one of our 12 major keys or one of our 12 minor keys. And for the examples I played, the first one was in F major, the second one was in D flat major, and the last was in A major. Now, even with 24 options, you might already be feeling like that's going to constrain you. If I only have 24 keys to choose from, well, then I'm only ever going to be able to come up with 24 different improvised ideas at the piano keyboard. That's the wrong way to think about improvisation. Anytime someone improvises or composes a piece of music, they are working within constraints. It's the same as how when you say something to a friend, you're saying something new, but you're only using words that are familiar to you both. Here, choosing a major or minor key to play in is what will make your short improvised chord progression sound like it belongs to a familiar musical language. And if you're more of a beginner, there's nothing wrong with just using C major or A minor. Those are kind of the native keys of the piano keyboard. If you only play white keys, by default, you're going to be in C major or A minor, and you can choose chords from those keys. If you do want to become more fluent in all of the keys that you can play on the piano keyboard, that's the guiding principle of my Piano Fluency membership program. So if you're curious to learn more about that and the kind of creative drills I give to students to learn all their keys, you should head to my website. Step 2 is to pick numbers or chord functions. Now, first, I'll explain the chord functions of the examples I played, and then we'll talk about why this is so important. The first example was 1, 5 of 6, or 3, 6, and then 4, with a little walk down there from 4. The second example was just 1 and 6, and the last example was 1 and 2. If you're not familiar with this concept of numbers or chord functions, we're analyzing the chords in the context of the key. So for example, in A major, the A major 7 chord was a 1 chord. The B minor 7 chord was a 2 chord because it's the second note of the A major scale. And these numbers or functions define the sound of a chord to our ears. As you get more experienced with this kind of chord improvisation, you'll learn to recognize the sounds of these different chord functions. It's a great idea to start small and gradually expand your palette. So if you're starting in the key of C major, you can first just experiment with moving between 1, 4, 5, and 6. These are the most common chords in pop music. Then for your second palette of harmony, you might add in the other diatonic chords, that is, the other chords that belong in the key of C major. Those would be D minor and E minor. And for now, you could probably skip B diminished, but that is another diatonic chord. Another good one to know is 5 sus. So that's G major, but played as a sus4 chord. And the next palette of chords after that might be secondary dominants. A shortcut to those is to turn the minor diatonic chords into major or dominant 7 chords. And you can also play with borrowed chords. Here that might be an F minor chord, borrowing from C minor, or a B flat major chord. Now that was a super brief overview of the chord functions that you're likely to gradually add to your palette in a major key. The thing to keep in mind is that pretty much any piece of music you play is going to be composed of chord functions like this. So if you do a brief analysis of the music you're playing, you can learn which chord sounds you like the best and gradually add those in to the chords that you like to try when you're improvising or writing a new chord progression. Now is where things get interesting. You're going to imagine a rhythm. Imagine some sort of rhythmic gesture that you want to hear. You can do this away from the instrument because you don't want to get wrapped up yet in the technique of how this is going to happen. For example, with the first pattern, I imagined I wanted to hear something like boom, 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 that kind of momentum there. Then I was able to work that through the chord functions that I was playing. With the second example, I just thought of this sort of rich, steady, repeated pattern in my right hand with a lot of sustain pedal. And with the last pattern, I thought of this bump, 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 kind of dance-like rhythm. Now, I've been improvising for most of my life at the piano, and I'm familiar with lots of different styles of music, and those things are contributing to my ability to just come up with these patterns and immediately translate them onto my hands. But you can get started right away with very, very simple ideas. Let's say that you're in the key of C major, and you've chosen the following chord functions: 1, 3, and 6. Now let's imagine some very simple rhythm. How about bum, 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 moving on from there. Now you might find that even improvising a very simple rhythm feels overwhelming to you, or you might feel like you're getting stuck in the same kind of rhythm every time you sit down to play. In that case, my best suggestion is to get inspired by music that you love. You can pull up different recordings, and even if you can't replicate the rhythm pattern or the groove that you're hearing on the recording, you can get inspired by it, by the kind of tempo and feel of what you hear. If that makes you worried that your improvisations or compositions are going to be overly derivative, don't worry. A lot of times we can make something new by combining two old things. And a lot of great songwriters and beat makers that I know will often start a new piece of music this way. They'll take some sort of drum groove that they absolutely love, just start from the drums and copy another piece of music, but then add in their own new chord progressions or production elements. And you would never know when you hear the finished product that it started by basically copying a groove from another piece of music. Step 4 is where a lot of the skill comes in. We're going to apply arranging tools. By this, I mean all of the ways that we can modify those basic chord functions from the key we're in. To use our student example, if we're in the key of C and we're playing C, E minor, A minor, well, we can use inversions in our right hand, and then we're not going to have to jump around like this. In my examples, I was using other bits of musical language that I've picked up over the years. In the first example, to go from the A chord to the D minor chord, I used this walking tenths idea. I also used a walk down from the B flat to the F. In the second example, I thought of the key of D flat major. I reached for this nice rich voicing with the 9th added on top. And then I used the idea of pedal tones, notes that are held out from one chord to the next, regardless of whether they fit in the same way in the next chord. So I held out all of these notes in my right hand as pedal tones when I went to the 6th chord. And that creates this kind of B flat minor 11 chord. In the last example, I used this very open voicing that I like for a major 7 chord. And I just moved all of the voices up stepwise to get to that 2nd chord. All these little ideas are things I've picked up over the course of my life as a musician. And that ultimately will give you your own voice as an improviser, songwriter, composer. You want to be aware of the things you especially like in new pieces of music that you learn, so that you can bring them with you when you sit down to improvise or compose a short chord progression like this. And we talk about this as vocabulary. This is your vocabulary as an improviser. Going back to that language metaphor, you start to learn these phrases or words from your favorite pieces of music, and then you'll be able to apply those without thinking in your own improvisations. The last step is to follow your ear for melodic ideas that you're hearing. Even if you're just improvising a chord progression, we still will often hear whatever's on top as some sort of melody. A great example is the last chord progression I played. I was following my ear to create that little bum, 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 bum melody on top of the progression. This is where functional ear training can really help, connecting your ear with the sound of all the scale degrees in a key. And I highly recommend the Functional Ear Trainer app for that. It's a free app. I have other videos as well on the topic of ear training. But this can really add life to short chord progressions that you improvise. If you have a little bit of melodic material on top and you let that guide your ear as you move to the next chord. Going back to the student example, I like that sound of the A minor chord going from an E on top to a D on top. I'm just following my ear with that. And even though this is no longer officially an A minor chord, it's often going to work really well to change just one of the notes in a chord to suit what you're hearing. And as long as you then return to more familiar chords, more familiar material within the key of the song, our ear will accept it, and it actually makes music more interesting. Over time, this will happen not only with melodies, but also with those chord functions. When I described, choosing your chord functions from a palette of available chords, it probably sounded pretty clinical. But over time, you'll start to be able to follow your ear to the next chord. You know what the 4 chord sounds like. So as you improvise, you might find yourself wanting to hear something as that next chord, and you'll refine your instincts over time as to what that chord should be. With all of these steps involved in improvising a short chord progression, the best thing to do is just to try it. We get better at this through practice, and you shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes when you're improvising. I remember when my teacher in college first told me that I should try doing this sometimes, just sitting down and coming up with a chord progression from scratch. And I felt totally overwhelmed by it. I had maybe tried writing songs very slowly and laboriously before, but actually just trying to keep playing and improvising a chord progression was very intimidating. But as I started to try it, I became less scared of it. And it did a lot to train my ear to recognize the different chords that belonged within a key. Eventually, I got comfortable enough with this that when I was accompanying church services, which I did for many years, during the kind of pass the peace part of the service, I would just improvise music as an underscore to the hellos that everyone was saying to each other. And that also was really good practice for feeling comfortable just coming up with a chord progression, a piece of music on the fly that sounded like it kind of belonged in the style of church music. To recap, here are the skills that matter most for improvising short chord progressions. Familiarity with different key signatures, familiarity with chord functions and how they sound, a broad palette of rhythm patterns that you're comfortable with and grooves that you've been inspired by in the music that you like, a vocabulary of arranging tools that let you go from the basic functions of a chord progression to a beautiful piece of music, and a good ear and a sense for how to construct a melody on the fly. If you're feeling inspired to develop these 5 skills, you can check out the other videos on my channel that address these topics. Or if you're the kind of student who wants a progressive learning path where you're really going to practice consistently and learn these skills in an ordered progression of difficulty, that's the idea behind the Piano Fluency membership program. So I'll point you there once again. That's at pianofluency.com. Thank you for joining me in this video. My name is Ted.